All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming out today. Um, we're going to talk about what it means to be an education volunteer with the Eno River Association and some opportunities to do that. My name is Eli. I'm the AmeriCorps Education Program Coordinator, and I'm joined here by Hillary Harrison, who's our Director of External Engagement, and Audrey Gentry, who is the Education Manager here at the Eno River Association. So they're together on that nice background up there. Um, so hopefully we will be able to answer any questions that you might have. I'm going to talk here for about 20 minutes or so. Hopefully it's short and sweet, and then we'll leave a lot of time for questions should anybody have anything that comes up. Just to let you know what we're going to be talking about, I wanted to start with an intro to the Eno River, the watershed and the river itself, and then talk about the history a little bit of the Eno River Association and some of the work that we do. This might be review for some of y'all, but this is a large portion of the content that we want our volunteers to be conveying at our public facing events. And since this will be recorded, I think it's worth going through that again. But then from there, I'll talk a little bit about the specific types of education programming we do and where we look for volunteers and best practices for those types of events. And then I'll finish it out with just a quick slide about ways that you can connect with us and ways that we would love for you to ideally get program attendees connected with us. And then we'll leave time for questions. First, just to situate ourselves geographically a little bit, this is the Eno River watershed here outlined in this red line. So the Eno River itself starts up here at a preserve that we own called the Confluence Natural Area up north of Hillsborough, and it flows for about 40 miles through Hillsborough and North Durham into Falls Lake. So the watershed encompasses parts of Orange and Durham counties. And then from Falls Lake empties into the Neuse River and then eventually into the Atlantic Ocean. Um, and it's a special river, not only for its history, but also because of the amount of green space that we have along it, and because it provides drinking water to Hillsborough and through Falls Lake, it provides drinking water to parts of Wake County. So it's a really important local river. The Eno River Association is a nonprofit land trust that was founded in the 60s. So in the 60s, there was plans to build dams around what is now Eno River State Park. Um, and that would have destroyed a lot of local history and important green space. So there was a coalition of local activists that banded together, led by Margaret Nygaard, that advocated against this and were successful. So they were successful in stopping the dams from being built and turned that land into what is now Eno River State Park. And from that sort of community grassroots beginning, we're now a fully fledged nonprofit with 10 plus full-time year-round staff. We hire more during the summer months. I'll talk about that a little bit later. We're in the process of hiring some other positions right now, so we're rapidly growing. Um, and there's sort of a few different buckets for our work. So we do a lot of, because we're a land trust, so one of our main directives is to buy and protect land. So we do a lot of conservation work and a lot of stewardship work, so management of that land that we buy. Um, and I'll talk about that a little bit because I think it's worth knowing a little bit of the mechanics of that part of our work. But where Audrey and Hillary and I are most spend most of our time is sort of in the outreach and advocacy um, parts. Um, so despite being a land conservancy, I think we're kind of unique in that we really invest a lot of time and resources in making sure that we have a broad reaching outreach and education program, which is really cool. And we're always looking to expand it with the help of volunteers. Just to finish off, our mission at the ERA is to protect the natural, cultural, and historic resources of the Eno River Basin in Durham and Orange counties. So, like I said, conservation and stewardship is a big part of our work. Um, The Eno River State Park that I mentioned earlier, that was formed in 1973, has now grown to over 4,000 acres. It's a really popular park. I don't know how many visitors we have annually, but it's a lot of people that are using that park. We also protect land. We work with private landowners to protect their land under conservation easements. And then we have a couple of our own um, public preserves. So I mentioned the Confluence Natural Area up in Efland, and also nearby the Panther Branch Natural Area, which was open in 2023, are a couple of our public uh, preserves that we own and manage ourselves. In a lot of cases, because we're a nonprofit, not a government entity, we can move a little faster on purchasing land than the state park can. So a lot of the land that we buy gets transferred to the state park, but we do have those two um, properties that are open to the public, and they're really nice views of the Upper Eno. So worth checking out if you haven't been there already. So to date, through all these different protocols, we've conserved over 7,500 acres. So we've grown a lot since the 70s. Um, and we rely on huge teams of volunteers to get this work done. So you can see some of our volunteers and actually our stewardship manager building a trail there. So if you're interested in that kind of outdoor stewardship type work, um, trail building, invasive species removal, that's another big part of what our organization does, and there's always ways to get involved there. But I know y'all are here to hear about education volunteering. Um, that's what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about. We have a really big and expanding education program. So we've reached over 6,000 people and over 6,000 community members in both 2023 and 2024. And we're hoping to continue broadening our reach in 2025. We do a lot of different kinds of programming. Audrey and I are especially involved in school programs during the academic year. So going into Title I or economically disadvantaged schools and delivering content that aligns with their curriculum standards. We also do like one-off private programs, guided hikes, tabling events, and summer camps during the summer. So we have two summer camps. I walk the Eno, which is at the state park for 8 through 12-year-olds, and then Eno River Field Station at our Confluence natural area. That's for slightly older kids. Both a lot of fun. And I'm going to talk about a few of these different types of programming in a little more depth shortly here. We also put on the festival for the Eno. Um, for anybody that's not familiar with this, it's an annual music festival that happens at the beginning of July. It's a really big event. There's lots and lots of volunteer opportunities. Again, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but it's another cool way to get involved. So the first kind of educational programming that we're hoping to get volunteers for is tabling. So tabling is special because it's one of the best tools that we have to connect with people that are not already part of our organization. A lot of our programming, like our hike series and the festival, tends to be populated by people who have at least heard of the Eno River or are familiar with the Eno River Association. So that's not the case with tabling, because we often get to sort of far-flung places, or at least farther flung places than the state park. There's a range of event focus areas and sizes. So I recently tabled at MetLife, which is an insurance company in Cary, and very few people had heard of the Eno River Association. And then we also try every year to table at Bugfest, which is in Raleigh, and that attracts hundreds of people to our table. So it's a great way to get people connected with us who otherwise wouldn't be. Um, and because there's a range of these focus areas, we sort of have a range of tabling setups. We keep our materials for these in designated tabling boxes at our office on Guest Road. Um, but typically things that you'll take would be documents to show, information about our organization, things like annual reports, um, state park trail maps. We've got little cards with, you know, preserve locations on them. Um, And then we try to keep it like engaging with educational materials of some sort. So for Bugfest, we bring a lot of invertebrate information and games and related to bugs and, invertebrate specimens. We also have, pelts and skulls that we try to bring because it's a nice talking point that sort of introduces people to some of the conservation work that we do if we can have a natural history lens for our tabling. Um, so again, if you decide to do tabling with us, um, we'll go over all of this information with you again, and we'll coordinate, the pickup and the drop off of these materials. But this is just intended to be sort of an overview of some of the areas that we're hoping to use volunteers for. Um, One other consideration with tabling is that we have these QR codes that go in the tabling box and they take people to our website to get involved in our email list and to get plugged into future volunteer opportunities. And there's also QR codes for donations. That's a really important consideration when you're tabling, is we're hoping to use this as an opportunity to grow our membership. So talking to those people that come up to the table and engaging with them and getting them interested in signing up for one of those volunteer slots, or at least on our newsletter, our email list, is really, really helpful. That's a great use of tabling. Another thing that we do that's very popular is our hike series. Um, and we really rely on teams of volunteer hike leaders and hike assistants um, to keep things going and to keep it accessible to a range of people. If anybody is bilingual, for example, and interested in leading a hike in another language, that's something we're really interested in exploring. We'd love to get our hikes accessible to as many of our community members as possible. Um, there's these two sort of positions, the hike leaders and hike assistants. Hike leaders are responsible for walking at the front of the pack. And if it's a guided educational hike, you'll be delivering some sort of educational content throughout it. So it's good to, uh, it's typically good to have been an assistant first, or at least have a good working knowledge of what you're going to be talking about before you sign up to be a hike leader. And then hike assistants, you're either a sweep, which is walking at the back of the pack, making sure nobody gets left behind, or you're interspersed throughout the pack, just making sure that, everybody's having good trail etiquette, stepping off to the right side if there's hikers coming the other way, making sure we don't get too far apart and just keeping an eye on everybody. But for the most part, being a hike assistant is a pretty chill gig. You're normally just walking along with the pack and keeping an eye on things. So we've got two main types of hikes that we do. We do guided hikes, which is, like I said, where we'd have a leader that was delivering some sort of educational content. And we have drop-in hikes, which is where you're just getting out and walking. So that's pretty self-explanatory. But the guided hikes, there are two different types. We've got a culture and history hike series, which is usually in the fall and winter months when it's a little bit colder. And then a wildflower hike series, which is during the spring when things are blooming. Wildflower hikes, usually we like to get people that are familiar with the local flora, who can point out different types of wildflowers and identification and facts about them. And then our culture and history tends to focus on things like indigenous history and colonial history, the history of the mills. We've got a lot of mills along the Eno. Our history hikes tend to focus on that. And then sometimes we throw environmental history on there because we've got a lot of interesting, environmental history from pre-colonial times to colonial Durham to the present day, how the ecosystems along the Eno have changed. Um, Another important sort of task for especially the hike leaders is to be responsible for checking hikers in. So we'll get you, if you are a hike leader, we'll get you a roster of people that have registered for your hike before you get out there. And just checking people in and getting hikers to sign waivers. They should already have signed waivers online that come to their email, but oftentimes people haven't filled those out. So just making sure that they've got some sort of a waiver, either digitally or on paper, that you'll have. And then you're sort of responsible for representing the Eno River Association. So talking about, giving a little spiel like I did at the beginning, although probably more abbreviated, just talking about what we do, who we are, our history, because a lot of the people that come on these hikes are familiar with the Eno and the Eno River Association, but some aren't. So any opportunity that we have to talk about our mission is really valuable. Um, and I wanted to talk about sort of our one-off educational programs too. A really popular program that we do is macroinvertebrate catching. We do lots of different kinds of programs, but macroinvertebrate catching tends to be one we do semi-regularly, especially in stream-in events in the fall, and our sort of semi-annual Nature Fun Day series at the Confluence. And macroinvertebrates, just for anybody who's not familiar, are basically just water bugs. So macro meaning not micro, macro meaning big enough to see with the naked eye, and invertebrate meaning an animal without a backbone. So it's things like crayfish and, stonefly, mayfly, larvae, dragonfly nymphs. Although you will sometimes catch cool vertebrates like fish and salamanders and frogs and things. And it's a lot of fun. We get, a lot of people, hands and feet wet in the river, hands-on, catching things and learning about them. And it's a really cool program. Um, some special considerations for this is that as a volunteer facilitator for this, you're sort of responsible for since it is a hands-on program, safety information, making sure that people are using nets and things respectfully, wearing closed-toed shoes in the river, for example. Um, and then you're also responsible for making sure that we have safe and respectful handling um, of the animals and the habitat. Things like making sure that invertebrates stay in water as much as possible. We'll have tubs and little aquaria that you'll be able to view them in if you take them up out of the river, but you fill those with water and make sure that everything is sort of staying in a reasonably temperature controlled environment with not a lot of disturbance, making sure things get returned back to the river, the part of the river that they were collected in. Um, and then if you're lifting up rocks, putting rocks down the way they were, so you're not ripping up the habitat too much, because this is a little bit more of an invasive program that we do to the environment. So we want to just minimize our impact as much as possible. And then sort of equipment management, so keeping track of our nets and you'll get bins with different sorts of identification keys and field guides and nets and aquariums. Um, Keeping track of those, keeping track of waders if we use waders. Um, that's just another consideration for this program. And we will go over um, basic identification stuff with you beforehand. We don't want you to be flying blind on these things, because I know it's a little bit more intensive to know how to identify the different kinds of invertebrates. But there's not that many of the different species that we catch commonly. And the main takeaway that we want people to walk away with is that there's different species of macroinvertebrates in rivers, and some are sensitive to pollution and some are less sensitive to pollution. And so looking at that diversity and the distribution of those species can tell us a lot about how healthy the water is. So as it happens in the Eno River, we've got a lot of species, some that are really sensitive to pollution, um, some that are not as sensitive, but we have great biodiversity in the Eno and we have really good water quality. So typically these programs at the confluence or at the state park are pretty productive, and we catch lots of interesting things. Um, and then finally, just wanted to touch on the festival briefly. Um, so like I said before, we consider this like our largest public facing event, largest outreach event. We get an attendance often of upwards of 20,000 people each year. It typically happens on two non-consecutive days in early July. One of them is usually the 4th, the other one is often the 2nd or the 6th. Um, but those first few days of July, so it's hot, but it's a lot of fun. It's a big music festival, but there's also vendors and information and educational opportunities. So there's tons of ways to get involved. We've got hundreds of volunteer opportunities. The educational stuff that we're involved with tends to be tabling, like you see here, and then EEK, environmental education for kids. which is just a macroinvertebrate catching setup in the river. And this is all at West Point on the Eno off of Roxborough Road, if anybody's been there before. But um, should you decide you want to go and you really don't want to do education and volunteering, there's also a ton of other volunteer slots ranging from setup to breakdown to selling things to counting money, all sorts of fun things. And the great thing about this is that if you volunteer, you get a free ticket. So one quick volunteer slot um, gets you access to all of the great things that the festival has to offer. We have not started filling volunteer slots for this yet, I don't think, but we will be in the coming months. So keep an eye on our e-news um, and social media content for more information about getting involved with festival because we will be um, in need of many volunteers for this in the coming months. And I wanted to finish out just talking about some ways that we have that you can connect with us. Um, or hopefully get folks that are attending your programs to connect with us as well. So we have our email list and then a monthly newsletter called e-news. By the way, if you're attending this call or if you attend an in-person volunteer training with us, we will assume that if you're not already, that you want to be on that email list. So we'll put you on it unless you let us know otherwise. So please feel free to let us know if you do not want to be on that list. Um, we also have a great website, which I didn't link here, I'm realizing, but it's got an events on the Eno calendar, which is it's got lots of cool events, things that we put on that are public, but also things that our partner organizations like the state park puts on. So it's a great way to stay abreast of um, things that are going on in the watershed and ways to volunteer and also just to participate in some cool programs. We also have a couple of great social media pages. We're at Eno River on Instagram and just the Eno River Association on Facebook. And these are both really active pages. We've got a great communications team that works on getting really interesting content on there. So you can hear about volunteer opportunities, but also historical facts about the Eno River. We do a nature note series. Um, where we talk about different flora and fauna and fun facts about them. There's beautiful photographs on there, so they're worth a follow if you have not already. And one last consideration for when you do these programs is it's really helpful to us if you can count your participants. So when you do these programs, we'll provide you with some sort of a clicker that allows you to get a head count. Um, but we really rely on that data to track our programs and look if there's areas that we need to expand in or improve in. And then it's also really helpful when it comes time for us to write grants and get funding. We use those data, and that's really helpful. And that's just about all I have. I wanted to thank everybody for showing up today. We really rely on volunteers as an organization to allow our work to continue and grow. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your lunch today to join us. Um, and with that, I'll share the image credits there and move on to questions. If there's